Welcome, everyone. My name is Matt Gardner. I'm going to start by thanking you for joining us today for the release of our practice framework and participation framework, both of which are centred around the rights of the child as a guiding paradigm for us. Importantly, these have been developed in collaboration with children and young people from right across Australia. I'm coming to you on the land of the Waka Waka people today and would like to pay my respects to elders, past and present, and to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people joining us today, of which I know there are many. By registering today, you're joining over 500 other people individually and in offices around the country and wherever few overseas as well, including practitioners and therapists, policymakers, statutory officers, including children's commissioners and human rights commissioners. And in particular, I want to acknowledge and thank our National Children's Commissioner, Anne Hollands, who I know is on the line, as well as many other CEOs and senior leaders from across our sector. Please feel free to put any comments or questions using the chat function, and we'll try and answer those as we go. We've got a few of our team members who will jump on when we're not speaking to respond to that, but we'll put together a Q&A following the event and we'll circulate that. Thanks, Rochelle. So, look, we're presenting to you today following in the footsteps of our founder, who was quite an extraordinary woman named Eglantine Jebb. She started to save the children over 100 years ago, and her advocacy for children following the World War led to her to draft the Charter of Child Rights, which eventually went on to become what we know today as the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. Our new name and brand, 54 Reasons, references the 54 articles in the convention today. We remain proudly part of Save the Children, a global movement of over 120 countries around the world, drawing on the best of what works for children, both here and around the world, which is particularly relevant for us as such a multicultural society here in Australia. As Australia's leading child rights organisation, we offer services in every state and territory, and we exist to ensure that all children's rights are met in all their diversity, creativity and curiosity. And we advocate with and provide direct support to these children and their families so that they experience safety, learning, belonging and agency. And today I'd ask you to remember what it was like to have the curiosity of the child. You'll hear from our Head of Practice and Impact Measurement, Kylie Williams, and our Child Rights and Participation Manager, Erin Hoffman, and our National Policy and Advocacy Lead, Howard Chu, as well as, importantly, some of our young advisors. We'll share insights into how we've gone about embedding a child rights approach into our practice and our advocacy, and how this translates directly into outcomes. It's not a reference to high quality, but to efficacy, which is an important distinction. The practice framework sets out the beliefs, the behaviours and methodology that we draw on in our work. And whilst a few of us are presenting today, I also want to acknowledge all of the people who have contributed to this really significant and transformative piece of work. We'll also share our approach to child participation in practice. And we know that when children feel like their voice matters and the adults genuinely want to hear what they have to say, that we increase the protective factors in their lives and the case for the change of systems. Thanks, Rochelle. So I mentioned significant change for us. We've introduced a new name for our work in Australia, a new strategy, a new strategic direction. And this is the launch of, I guess to make that real, to make that really impactful in what we do rather than just guiding documents. This is where it actually impacts on the work that we do every day. So our strategic ambition is to make rights real, to move from ideology to reality in the lives of children and young people, and to influence towards systems that do work and that don't harm, towards equity and inclusion. We've tried to make this about simplicity and not complexity, accessible and measurable and not generalised and corporate. Importantly, we recognise that we're not perfect. We've got a long way to go in this. A lot of improvement to make and ongoing to remain relevant. And I would say at the core of this that we accept that part of being accountable is being transparent and being vulnerable about where we've got to improve. Our strategy is about impact and not about how great we are. We've got an obligation to children and young people as rights holders, and our strategic intent reflects this. Now I'm just going to show you a short video about our approach and the potential when we see the world through the eyes of a child. Thanks.
What happens when you see the world through the point of view of a child? Life becomes exhilarating, and the unimaginable becomes real. Our approach to working with young people is simple. When they tell us what they need, what they want, and what they dream of, we listen. It's their voices that inform and drive the focus of our work. And we ask other adults to listen too. We don't just work with children and young people, we walk alongside them and strive to see the world as they do, so we're able to act in a meaningful way and with real impact. To ensure all children and young people across Australia have their rights met so that they thrive.
Thanks, Rochelle. So just briefly, I thought I'd mention why we want to share. I think we've all been part of organisations where, we create work like this and want to keep it to ourselves, protect our IP. But ultimately, we're one sector with, similar goals and ambition for the children and families that we work with. And what you find is ultimately that we all converge on particular things, whether it's, all of the things that become common terms that we overuse. And, we hope that with any luck, if by sharing and encouraging and bringing people in and wanting to collaborate, that we can converge on children's rights. So we're really open to sharing our material. We hope that we will learn more, we'll get some feedback on that, and that we'll share with one another. So our Child Rights Practice Framework brings together evidence-informed practice elements that have been demonstrated to contribute to positive, strong and sustainable outcomes for children. But a framework like this is foundational to an outcomes-focused culture and plays a critical role in creating a genuine accountability within an organisation. The part 2 to this, of course, is an outcomes framework, and we'll save that for a later event. Again, we're happy to share our methodology and workings behind that as we're building the evidence. But we do that, I guess, to ensure that our services are achieving the impact that they're intended, and that we're accountable through detailed and robust outcomes that are measured within the framework. As I said, we'll share that at a later date. And another important piece to that is that we've actually just finished development of an outcome management approach. So again, recognising that if we're going to go through this fundamental change in the way that we practice, that to support the people doing that work every day, that we need to fundamentally change the way that we manage people as well, and take a similarly robust evidence-based approach to make sure that we do have a highly engaged and well-supported workforce. So again, that maybe we'll make that as a part 3. But all of these pieces come together, and my point there really is that by doing one without the other, we've got zero chance of implementation. And I think we've all seen that happen before. So we're committed to this. Again, welcome your feedback as we take on this really comprehensive change to the way that we do business. Now going to introduce our National Lead Policy and Advocacy, Howard Chu. Thanks, Howard.
Thanks, Matt. And hi everyone, as Matt said, my name's Howard Chu and I'm 54 Reasons National Policy and Advocacy Lead. I know we've got people coming in from around the country, but I'm sitting on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation today in Naarm, Melbourne. So the little video that we saw just a bit earlier was a bit of a snapshot of our approach at 54 Reasons and how we think about child rights. And in the rest of this event, we're going to dive deeper into its ideas. And today we want to propose and discuss some big ideas. They're big in the sense that they need big conversations, and also in the sense that they can be the basis for big, in fact, really huge positive change. And the first big idea we want to discuss with you all is this, that an investment in a child rights approach is an investment in a better world for children. So let's break that down just a little bit. Firstly, child rights. If I can try to say this just as simply as possible, children's rights are the things that all children should be entitled to expect so they can develop healthily and thrive. And this is about opportunity, and it's also about outcomes. As many of you will know, children's rights have been enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is actually the most widely ratified of all human rights treaties globally. And in 1990, Australia formally agreed to comply with the convention, or the CRC as we and probably many of you fondly know it as. And so that means that governments are legally obliged to uphold the rights of children in Australia. And what the CRC does, what that convention does, is sets out a vision of a world where all children have the opportunity to reach their fullest potential. And that really does mean all children, in all their diversity, as Matt said before, and regardless of where they start in life. And what the Convention also does is it establishes minimum standards for what it takes to achieve that inspiring vision. So a safe home environment, an adequate standard of living, access to education, access to justice, connection to family and culture, being heard and taken seriously, and that's to name just a few. And these are rights that all children have. They're not a privilege that's only available to some, and they're not available only when adults decide to allow children to have them, but they're rights. And I should just say at this point that I've been referring to children, and we'll do that a bit today, and that's given how that word is defined in the Convention as people aged up to 18. But, you know, when speaking in other contexts, and particularly when speaking to children and young people themselves, we would generally refer to children and young people as more appropriate language. Of course, rights are only meaningful when they're realised, so that is when they're actually made a reality through concrete action and when they're experienced by children themselves. And that won't be the case until everyone understands and acts to promote children's rights. Speaking of language, we know that talking about rights can get some people offside, and maybe especially when we dare to talk about children having rights. So we know that language of human rights, children's rights, it can cause misunderstanding, even hostility in some quarters. But we've chosen to foreground the importance of children's rights explicitly because we think there's something vital and really meaningful in talking about it in those terms. And unfortunately, we all know that for many children across Australia, rights violations are a daily reality. And it's just worth pausing on that just for a second, to reflect that undeniably the basic human rights of children across Australia are being breached on a daily and a systematic basis. So if you're looking for a burning platform, I'd suggest it doesn't get any clearer than that. So what we're proposing here is that to truly create a better world for children, what's needed is a child rights approach, one that's adopted by governments, by services, and by everyone whose decisions and actions affect children. And I want to really emphasise that a child rights approach has a specific meaning. It's not just anything and everything to do with children, and nor is it just how adults might interpret children's best interests. So what you can see on screen is just a really brutally summarised summary of how things would be different under a child rights approach compared to what we have currently. And as you look at those, I'd just like to pose a couple of questions to everyone just to think about. So when you think about your work with children, in whatever capacity that is, and as Matt said, we know we've got service providers, policymakers, representatives of government, researchers, advocates, representatives of children's commissioners and other oversight bodies. But whatever your work with children is, what do you see as the barriers to truly improving children's outcomes? Does what's on screen resonate in terms of what you see as the underlying problems? And also what we should be aiming for in terms of a better future state. So if I could just ask you to have that in mind as we go through today. But really at its core, a child rights approach is about centering children and their development. It's about focusing on children and taking children seriously in their own right, as active agents who have their own distinct experiences of the world. And a child rights approach insists on recognising that children, like all people, are entitled to access the conditions, the services, the supports and the opportunities they need to develop and thrive. So as such, a child rights approach is inherently ecological. It sees children in their context, in the context of their families, their communities, their cultures, and also the systems that affect them. And a child rights approach brings into focus those underlying conditions and root causes that affect children and their development. Of course, all of this is underpinned by a commitment to hearing and taking seriously children's own voices and experiences as the basis for all actions and decisions that affect them. Everyone's got a right to shape their own lives, and that includes children. So the idea we're talking about here is that if we invest in a child rights approach to supporting children and their families, we'll see transformational benefits for individuals and for our society as a whole. Or putting that another way, a child rights approach is how we can create a better world for children in partnership with children themselves. And there's a few levels to that. So at the level of practice, there's clear evidence that a child rights approach leads to improved individual outcomes. And at this level, a child rights approach starts with truly seeing children as clients in their own right. And this is directly aligned to what we know from the science of child development and research about evidence-informed approaches that are impactful for children and their families. We know that when we work with children in ways that are strengths-based, holistic, integrated and responsive to children's own priorities and experiences, their outcomes will be better. And that might sound simple, maybe even try it to many of you, but of course actually doing it well and with fidelity, that's the challenge. And a child rights approach also has huge benefits at the system level. So at that system level, a child rights approach involves truly centering children's experiences, their perspectives, their voices, and their rights. So it's about making children visible as service users and also as active and participating members of our society and valuing them. So in turn, this child rights approach at the system level, it gives us a framework for designing and implementing policies in a way that's actually organised around people and outcomes, rather than being captured by the status quo and by policy design and service delivery silos. And in fact, a child rights approach inherently bridges across those silos precisely by centering around the person, the child. At the same time, a child rights approach broadens our frame and opens up better ways to achieve policy objectives. And in some cases, that might include rethinking what those objectives are in the first place. By highlighting root causes, a child rights approach gives us a comprehensive framework for preventive and early intervention approaches. And naturally, it also gives us a structured way to engage the expertise and lived experience of children to inform all decision-making that affects them. So on that last point, if you think about other portfolios, there's increasing and I'd say really long overdue recognition of the enormous value of lived experience and how lived experience should be central to the policy and implementation process. And we're also seeing growing use of co-design and human-centered design methodologies in policy and service delivery in many portfolios. And all of that's at least as important for children as any other group in society, when you consider the distinctiveness of children's experiences of the world and also their marginalisation from influence about decisions that affect them. And a child rights approach gives us the tools and the rigour to enable this to be leveraged. Just lastly from me, and importantly, a child rights approach also gives us a way to unify practice, service delivery, policy and systems. And it does this again by centering all decision-making by governments and across systems, including at the individual level, around children and including their experiences and voices. And I'd say this kind of concerted focus can enable a consistency at all levels of all of the systems that affect children and within which governments and services are trying to improve children's outcomes. So in this way, a child rights approach can be the basis for whole of government and whole of system strategies that actually work. Now, the rest of our presentation today will focus squarely on a child rights approach in practice. And at this point, I'll hand over to my colleague, Kylie Williams, to talk more about what this looks like in action. Over to you, Kylie.
Thanks, Howard, and hi everyone. I'm Kylie Williams. I'm Head of Practice and Impact Measurement here at 54 Reasons, and I'm joining you from the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people in Brisbane. I'm going to share with you our second big idea for today, take a look at our child rights practice framework and share some resources that we use in our work with children. So Matt's alluded to this, but about 2 years ago, we set out to consolidate our practice and create foundational frameworks to guide our work, as well as developing our systems so that we could tell our story of impact. And we wanted child rights to explicitly form the foundation of our practice, to place children and their voices at the centre of our work, and for our practice to make rights real for children. As we've just heard from Howard, a child rights approach requires a shift in focus and thinking and challenging those dominant and long-held views of children to seeing children in their own right and taking them seriously as people who are entitled to access what they need to thrive. And this is our second big idea for today, that a child rights approach is about moving our thinking and our focus from a passive needs paradigm to seeing and valuing children as rights holders. Seeing children as rights holders and working with them in a rights-based way that reflects this shift is a really powerful change of mindset and an approach that we believe holds greater potential for achieving those really positive outcomes for children. And this is true at every level of the system, but it's most directly visible and tangible at the individual client level in our daily practice. And this is why over the past couple of years, we've invested our focus and resources moving away from traditional needs-based approaches to develop and implement a contemporary rights-based approach and getting really clear on what it looks like in our practice for our services and our advocacy. Seeing children in this way as rights holders, this has underpinned the design of our integrated approach to practice and impact measurement. And this diagram that you can see on the screen now is what we have in place to guide and inform our work at 54 Reasons. Each individual piece you can see here is connected to the others to form a holistic approach. The outer circles there, they support us so that we can measure our impact and monitor and review our practice. And the inner circles guide our direct practice and in turn enables us to deliver our practice with fidelity and consistency, and then informs our governance and decision making in those outer circles. So if we look at this graphic from the outside in, we have a practice governance framework and structure that helps us monitor key practice indicators at an organisational level. Our supervision framework, this supports our leadership to oversee practice at the service level and our practitioners so that they can make really informed decisions as they reflect on their work. Our framework for cultural responsiveness, this guides how we engage and learn from and work with children and families and communities in a cross-cultural context. So our practice indicators, they're led by our outcomes framework. And our outcomes framework provides a way for us to understand and measure the positive difference that we're making and support us to build the evidence of what's working. Our outcomes framework, we have a organisational wide program logic that defines the outcomes that we're aiming to achieve. And then we draw on this organisational program logic to develop more nuanced logics at the service level and identify measurement or outcomes tools to use in our work. The inner circle, this has our child rights practice framework, and I'm going to talk a bit more about this, but this is our overarching approach to practice that sits at the centre of all our other frameworks. From our child rights practice framework, we have developed a more detailed child participation framework, and that provides more further guidance on how we approach and enable participation for children at all levels of our organisation. And you'll hear more about that shortly too. And we have our promise to children. I'm going to show you that next. And our evidence-informed practice strategies or interventions. You'll also see on the screen single operating models. And we developed these because we wanted to make sure that we were clearly defining and bringing these frameworks to life across our core service areas. So our single operating models, they bring together our frameworks and apply them in detailed ways for each cohort across our work in the early years, family support, domestic and family violence, and youth. So the single operating models, they define the links between the evidence and our practice for that particular area and the specific evidence-informed practice strategies that we apply. They outline which outcomes we focus on and the tools that we use to measure these. And we take our practice standards and our skills and we drill down into what that looks like with that cohort. So all of this put together, this informs our data methodology to enable us to learn from data and inform our practice. And it also makes sure that we can report effectively and, most importantly, tell our impact story and the story of change for children and families. This is our child rights practice framework. And you'll notice our practice framework is called Child Eye View. And this reflects the lens through which we see our responsibility, which is through the eyes of a child and hence a child eye view. We wanted a really clear practice framework so that we were intentional and purposeful in our practice, so that we could measure our impact to make sure that what we were doing is working, and also to create a culture of practice excellence where no matter how experienced we might be, how many years we might have been doing this work, that we're continuing to reflect on and build our knowledge and skills. And we wanted to be really clear on our accountability to children and knowing that good intentions for our work are not enough and that the actions and decisions that we make now have a generational impact. All of our services at 54 Reasons are grounded in this framework, and the framework's intended to make expectations on our practice really clear and bring together the why we do what we do and how we do it. This framework, it sets a benchmark for our practice, and then we use it as a platform for ongoing development of tools and resources so that we're continually evolving and learning from what's worked and what we can do better. So you can see on the screen that our framework, it outlines a consistent set of values, principles, standards, and foundational practice skills. And these are based on what we consider to be best practice using a child rights approach. These were really important to us because they describe how we apply our professional knowledge and skills to make sure that children and families are experiencing a consistent and quality service from us. Making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable for the practice decisions that we make and the behaviours that children expect to see from us in our work. So if we think back to our first two big ideas, Child Eye View for us, it recognises that first big idea that an investment in a child rights approach is an investment in a better world for children. And it enables our second big idea. It moves our practice from a passive needs paradigm to seeing children as rights holders. So we've been implementing our approach to practice and impact measurement and Child Eye View and testing these frameworks over the past 12 months. And in recognising that our people are the most influential catalysts for change on the ground with children and families, we've made a significant investment in practice development for them to enable them to deliver Child Eye View and make sure that we're bringing everyone on the journey with us and that we're really learning and adapting as we put this into practice. That investment means that we've also resourced a dedicated practice and impact measurement team, and they've been leading this work and developing additional tools to support the implementation. Our practice framework and our overall approach, it's really comprehensive. There's like 100 pages and there's too much detail to go through all of it with you today. So I'm just going to share a few examples of some resources that we have to help make Child Eye View real in our daily practice and real for children in their experience with us. The resources that you're going to see, they're intended to provide children with accessible information about their rights. So in our practice, we make sure that rights are understood by children in relation to their daily lived experiences and that children have access to information in ways that are really relevant and accessible to them. When we're developing these resources, we're always thinking about what does this mean for children? How do they want to receive information? And our practitioners, they use these resources as conversation tools to explain what working together looks like. This first resource that I'm showing you today is Our Promise to Children and Young People. We developed Our Promise about 12 months ago through consultation and co-design with children across Australia of all ages and abilities around things that were important to them in the way that we work alongside them. And this is one example of how we take the principles that you saw in Child Eye View of being safe, effective and accountable, and we bring them to life for children. Our Promise, it's a child-focused version of our commitments to them and what they can expect to see from us. And this is important because for us to uphold their rights, children must also understand what they can and should expect from us. And while we're upholding their rights in our work, we're also educating them about their rights so we can be held accountable. It's also important that children have access to information in developmentally appropriate ways. So you can see we've developed an early years version and a middle years version. And we also have a video about this, which you can see on our website. Everybody at 54 Reasons agrees to Our Promise and demonstrates these commitments through behaviours and actions. And every child and young person receives a copy at the start of working with us. This is another resource that we use with children and young people in our work. And it's an example of how we take the standards and skills from Child Eye View and we bring these to life for children. So it explains through the lens of a child the journey of working with us and how we apply the standards and skills from Child Eye View into our work with them, what it feels like for children and young people in their experience, and how we will uphold their rights at every step. And our young advisors, which we're going to share with you today, supported us in developing this resource. And we also explain to children about consent and what this means in relation to their information when they're working with us and how we will listen to them. It's another way we're holding ourselves accountable to children, and we've created a video to help explain that. After the video, I'm going to hand over to Erin Hoffman, who's going to talk to you about our third big idea.
Welcome to 54 Reasons. You have the right to know about the activities you join in, what they involve, and why you're joining in. It's always okay to ask for more information, and it's okay to change your mind. When you join in activities, the adults at 54 Reasons will ask some questions about you and your family. This information helps them do lots of things. To get in contact with you, I'll let you know about the good things that are coming up, to check on how you're growing, and think about ways to help you, and learn from you how we can do better.
Sometimes the information will be shared to help others understand what children and families need most. 54 Reasons will keep your information you share safe.
This is because you have the right to privacy, and that means 54 Reasons won't share your personal information unless you need us to help protect you from being hurt.
Since you're under 18 years old, your parent or carer will help work through what information to share. The adults from 54 Reasons will sit with your parent or carer and you to decide what information they're going to collect, why they're collecting the information, and what they will do with the information.
You have a right to speak up and be heard. If you ever feel unsafe, worried, or unsure about something at 54 Reasons, let us know and we will help.
If you'd rather speak with other adults, that's okay too. You can find all the information on our website.
Do you have a question?
Do you have a question?
Do you have a question?
Do you have a question for 54 Reasons today?
Hi everyone, I'm Erin Hoffman, Practice Development Manager for Child Rights and Participation at 54 Reasons, and I'm calling you from Doralwool country today. Our Big Idea 3 recognises that children's participation is a right and a means to fulfil other rights of children. This idea that children's participation is both a right of children and a means to fulfil other rights is a powerful one. When children feel like their voice matters and that adults genuinely want to hear what they have to share, we are together in a better position to increase protective factors in their lives and be a catalyst for systemic change. Children's participation isn't about one-off activities or consultations. It's about an attitude towards listening to and learning from and walking alongside children. When there is a culture of children's participation that embodies this attitude, it sets children up for all their other rights to be protected and upheld. Some of the ways this plays out in practice includes that children are more likely to trust adults with their needs and concerns because they believe adults will listen and act in their best interests. That it includes adults learning things from children that they would not have otherwise understood, leading to better informed decisions. Children better understanding safeguarding and being more likely to share when they're at risk of harm. Children and adults working together in meaningful and ethical ways because of the mutual respect and trust that builds. And core to our child rights practice and participation frameworks, children feel seen, heard, and valued. We also know from research that children who enjoy positive and respectful opportunities to participate are more likely to be considerate of and concerned about the rights of others. There is a fantastic flow-on effect in communities when children enjoy their right to participate. Participation in practice has moved a long way in the past decade, but the challenge for us now is to ensure that children's participation is firmly embedded within organisational cultures and structures for decision-making. What is now needed is a stronger focus on accountability to what we're hearing from children and application of that learning to our everyday practice. Getting Big Idea 3 right means we need to properly understand what children's right to be heard is actually all about and what is required of us. In its simplest form, children have the right to have their own views on decisions that impact them, and adults have the responsibility to take children's views seriously. This right of children demands that adults learn how to listen to children in ways that match their developmental capacity and capabilities. It requires that we give children increasing responsibility in decisions as they grow, and that every children's views on issues that impact them are given due consideration. It means we need to be honest with ourselves about whether or not we're taking children seriously, how we're committing time and our resources to enabling children to be heard, and how we account for the decisions we make in their best interests. Our child participation framework has been created to help us get this right at 54 Reasons. While our child rights practice framework, Child Eye View, lays the groundwork for a practice culture informed by and committed to working through our child rights lens, we know that deepening our participation practices alongside children is key to getting this right. We've developed a child participation framework that recognises children and young people as partners and provides further guidance on how we approach and enable participation for children at all levels of our organisation. It speaks specifically to how we facilitate children's right to be heard and be taken seriously in our everyday work. Okay, this is our child participation framework. It's reflective of our deep commitment to act in the best interests of children, as is their right, and the knowledge that to act in their best interests, we need to first understand what's important to them and why. Importantly, it reinforces both children's rights and the things about participation they've told us are especially important to them. So you'll see that the framework comprises 5 child participation standards. These set a benchmark for how we practically apply children's right to participate in our work to ensure the voices of children are heard, that children's rights are upheld, and that children are effectively engaged in decisions that impact them. The standards start with making sure we meet children where they're at, not the other way around. They're leading to listening deeply and ensuring we take children seriously and challenge tokenism. We know that in order for children to get the most out of their participation, we need to invest in them, and that through this investment we can, together, champion a world where children are seen, heard, and valued. The standards complement and align with the 9 basic requirements for meaningful and ethical children's participation, which you can find on our website. The 9 basic requirements stem from Save the Children's own global consultations with children through the early 2000s. Learning from these consultations was poured into the general comment on the right of children to be heard, helping governments and decision makers understand what this right of children should look like when it's upheld. These 9 basic requirements are embedded into the way we work alongside children right across 54 Reasons. They're the principles we employ to ensure our participation standards remain centred on children's rights and best practice. 54 Reasons is a learning organisation, and this is one step on our learning journey. We know we're not always going to get it right first go, and that we need to evolve with children, young people, and families as we go. Something that's become really clear to us is the best way to be effective in children's participation is to take this journey alongside children. With this in mind, we've got 2 big undertakings in the works. One of those is to increase the ways we listen and learn from children and young people at all levels of our organisation, and this includes children across all developmental stages. And we want to do this through inclusive practices that ensure every child feels seen and heard. Secondly, we need to formalise the internal processes across 54 Reasons used to facilitate, consider, and report back to children on their views. Pathways for listening and processes for being accountable to children are critical in any organisation working with children. One of the most recent commitments has been through the establishment of the 54 Reasons Young Advisors program last year. Young advisors are paid employees of 54 Reasons. It comprises young people 13 to 18 years from our programs and communities in which we work. Our young advisors haven't been recruited to help us promote our organisation or to be the public face of who we are, but to help us be accountable to children. You might not see them on our website, but their decisions influence every layer of our organisation. They advise us on how to be a child rights organisation acting in the best interests of children and in ways that are relevant and informed by them. This includes reviewing and inputting into our ways of working, most recently, the What to Expect poster we shared with you today. The Young Advisors Program is one of many steps we're taking to strengthen what we do as a child rights organisation committed to learning and growing alongside children. We're just going to take just a moment to share reflections from a couple of young advisors on the program about why child participation is important to them.
Children and young people have the right to participate, and that basically means we have the right to share our views and to have our opinions respected.
Many young people believe that their opinions are often not taken seriously and are undermined by adults, just because we are seen as too young to understand. This is where 54 Reasons and Young Advisors comes into play. This team is a voice for young people.
There are so many things, so many decisions that are often made for us, and while that's okay, it's also really important that when it counts, our opinions are taken just as seriously as adults.
I think that many adults don't take our views seriously and pretend that they will do something about the problem that we've raised, but end up disregarding it.
Well, it's really important that children have a say, and that say is just as heard and just as listened to as adults.
Finally, our participation approaches will and should evolve with learning from children and young people. But the standards and principles in our child participation framework will help ensure that everything we do is powerfully underpinned by children's rights. If you'd like to foster discussions around how children's rights, in particular children's right to participate, are promoted within your organisation, we've created a Making Rights Real discussion starter resource you can access from our website. Thanks so much for your time today, and Matt, handing over to you.
Thanks, Erin. I'm just going to try and turn off the chat so I don't get distracted. Look, thank you. Thanks everyone for presenting that so beautifully. I do want to just sort of reiterate, as I said at the beginning, that this really is the beginning for us. You know, we've been building this over a long period of time and drawing on the expertise that exists in all parts of our organisation. But you know, the implementation will take some time, and you know, it's one of those things that, you know, do you do it in parts or do you do it all at once? And those of you who know us, we've decided to do it all at once, of course. So I guess my reflection as sort of hearing and listening to this, for people who might be thinking how we've actually approached this, given the change and what sort of came first, it would be tidy to say that we did this brand work and we, you know, worked out this name, and then we did our strategic planning and our business planning and practice framework. But actually, what we did right at the beginning was look back to our story and think about what works and what was important, and decided that we absolutely are a child rights organisation and needed to double down on that. And then when we thought that was right, the next thing that we did was to go out and do a really wide consultation with children and young people, and with, you know, many stakeholders. Many of you I know are on the line, to understand, you know, what was expected of us and what would this sort of approach take. So actually, even though we're presenting in sequence our practice framework and our participation framework towards the end of these major guiding pieces of work, it actually was the start for us, and we're just completing the loop. So, you know, through that we did hear from children and you know, and partners and our funders indeed, that they expect our organisation to be more vocal, to be an advocate and a voice on rights, and a voice, importantly, that translates rights into practical action. Expectation that we should be collaborative in this approach, that trying to keep it to ourselves is actually not in the best interests of children and young people. and to ensure that the voices, of course, and experiences are heard right across Australia. So, look, I suppose just to put that into perspective too, or to challenge perhaps some people who we're engaging with today. When we were doing this work at a particular phases, we've tested out and tested again and gone back and forward. And one interaction really stays in my mind. There've been many, but one in particular that I thought was relevant today. I was speaking with a really wonderful secretary of one of our government departments here in Australia, and I was telling her over dinner about where we were going, that we really think we need to lean into this child rights history that we've got and own it, and not be scared, not be scared off by any kind of political opposition that might bring about. And she said to me, when I said we're going to be a child rights organisation, we're really going to own that, we're going to name it, we're going to be explicit. And she said to me, well, every social service organisation should be a rights organisation. If you're not, why not? And I just thought I'd share that today, because when we're thinking about, for anyone who's designed a practice framework before, you start with thinking, what is that guiding paradigm? And typically we try and come up with something that's unique, or something that's topical or contemporary. But I guess my challenge to you is, within your own organisations, if you're not a rights organisation, why not? Why would that not be guiding your work? And I think that it's, through this, we have learned that it's not enough to be going down a path as an organisation and then say, oh yes, and we take a rights approach or a rights perspective. That's not enough. You either are, at the centre a rights organisation, or you are not. But to contradict myself, I don't know if you ever quite get there either. Just to flag our journey. So one other thing that has come out, and I think every person presenting today has talked about accountability on some level. And, I just, often that word gets a bit of opposition or challenge in different contexts. And I just wanted to name that, I feel really strongly about this, that accountability is psychologically safe. Accountability is attachment behaviour. It doesn't mean leaving, when you get something wrong. What it means and how it plays out in our work is accountability means being clear what you're committed to, and really open when you get it wrong. And most importantly, that you stay and fix it. So I guess that just, is behind when we say accountability. That's what I mean. I believe that's what we mean, including I know we've got some of our own people, some of our colleagues in 54 Reasons on the line today. And, I think that's important to say to our people every time as well, is that, we can present something that looks quite shiny, but we know that we've got work to do, and that work doesn't end. So really encouraging to see in the chat, some of the resources that other people and organisations have been sharing. Are really, how do we sort of come about creating some sort of repository and understanding of what across the sector and across our society, I suppose, people are doing in this space of children's rights. So I thank you for sharing that. Please keep sharing it. And feel free to take our resources. This is why we're doing this today. We want to share. We'd like you to use it, to share it, hopefully to reference it, but use it. This is that point of convergence that I spoke about earlier. We want it to be shared. That's the point of it. Keeping it to ourselves is not in anyone's best interests. So you can find what we've referred to today, and as well as a whole range of other resources on our new website. So we've gone with a new iteration of the website. Went live this morning, actually. Been a huge amount of work for our people to get that right, and we'll continue to improve that over time. One of the important things that that we, again, working to get right and probably haven't quite nailed yet, is that when we're talking about our audience and are challenged by, who is our audience for a website or for this sort of material that we've created, hopefully you've noticed that our audience, first and foremost, are children and young people. And so when the challenge comes to us about, well, that's great, but how is that regarded by, how are you meeting the needs of a government department that funds, a piece of work, for example? And our perspective is that actually, if we do a good job at actually serving children and young people, that's why we exist. We do that first and foremost. And if that's recognised, well, then actually we'll be asked to do more of that work, create more change through that. So unapologetically, our audience is not people like us who work in the sector. It's not people that fund our work. Strangely, it's actually children and young people. So we'll test that out and we'll see how it goes. You can watch. So check out the website. The tools and resources are there. If there's anything you can't find, get in contact with us, and we'd welcome you to reach out, and we'll go from there. So really excited about working with you all. Thank you so much for joining us today. There's a lot to get through. Really, the point was just giving some context and overview of this work and the materials, and we'll be happy to share. Thanks for your time, and have a great day.